In the village of Umoda, no name carried more respect than Moyo's. Moyo was known far and wide as the greatest hunter of his generation. He had taken down lions, buffaloes, and leopards with precision and bravery that few could match. His fame stretched beyond the village, and men from neighboring towns sought his counsel on hunting matters. Despite his strength and skill, Moyo was humble and always acknowledged that his success came not only from his ability but also from the blessings of the forest spirits. But even with all his fame and accolades, Moyo harbored a deep sadness. He and his beloved wife, Ada, had been married for over 10 years, yet their home remained childless. Moyo had faced down ferocious beasts without fear, but the longing in Ada's eyes, the quietness of their house, and the absence of a child's laughter filled him with helplessness. No matter how many hunts he succeeded in, Moyo felt incomplete. His only wish was to see his wife's face light up with the joy of motherhood. Ada was the light of Moyo's life, known for her kindness, wisdom, and beauty. The villagers admired her not just for her appearance but for the warmth she brought to everyone around her. She was often found helping the elderly, attending to the sick, or teaching the young girls in the village how to sew and cook. But underneath her gentle smile, Ada carried a deep sadness. Every night, she prayed fervently for a child, and with every passing year, her hope seemed to fade. Though Ada never expressed her sorrow outwardly, Moyo could see it in her eyes. They both wanted a child more than anything, but the years passed, and their prayers seemed to go unanswered. Still, Ada remained patient, hoping that one day their dream of becoming parents would come true. She loved Moyo deeply and was proud of the man he was, but their home felt incomplete without the laughter and joy that a child would bring. One evening, after Moyo returned from a tiring day in the forest, he was greeted by a sight he would never forget. Ada stood at the entrance of their home, her face glowing with joy. She could barely contain her excitement as she spoke softly, "Moyo, we are going to have a child." Moyo's heart leapt with joy, his eyes widening in disbelief. After all these years, their prayers had finally been answered. He couldn't contain his excitement, shouting out in celebration for the entire village to hear. The news spread quickly, and soon the villagers gathered at their home to congratulate the couple. Drums echoed through the night, and the people danced in celebration. For the first time in a long while, Moyo and Ada felt a sense of completeness. The sadness that had once haunted their hearts was replaced with joy and hope. The village of Umoda celebrated long into the night, knowing that their brave hunter would soon become a father. In the days that followed, Moyo made a vow to Ada. He promised her that he would not leave her side until their child was born. For the first time in his life, he set aside his hunting gear, choosing instead to focus on caring for his wife. He wanted to ensure that Ada was safe and healthy throughout the pregnancy, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. Moyo had always been a provider, but now his focus shifted to nurturing his family. Ada was grateful for Moyo's dedication. Together, they spent their days talking about the future, imagining what their child would be like. They discussed names and made plans for the nursery, dreaming of the day when their child would fill their home with laughter. For the first time in a long while, Moyo felt content. He had all he needed right in front of him, his wife and the promise of a child. Months passed, and as Ada's belly grew larger, so did Moyo's concern. While he had kept his promise to stay by her side, their food supplies were running low. The money they had saved was nearly gone, and Moyo began to worry about how he would provide for Ada and their unborn child. The thought of not being able to provide filled him with unease. He looked around their home, realizing that they had little left to sustain them for the remainder of Ada's pregnancy. Ada noticed the worry in Moyo's eyes but didn't say anything at first. She knew how important it was to him to provide for their family. As much as she wanted him to stay close, she couldn't deny that they needed more resources. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Moyo finally spoke up. "Ada, I need to go back into the forest," he said softly. "Only for a few days. We need more food and money for when the baby comes." Ada's smile faded, and though she didn't want him to go, she understood his concern. Ada hesitated before responding. She remembered Moyo's promise not to leave until the baby was born, and the thought of him going back to the forest filled her with fear. But you promised, she said quietly, holding his hand. Moyo nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. I know, my love. But if I don't go now, we won't have enough to take care of the baby when it comes. He smiled weakly, trying to reassure her. I'll only be gone for 3 days. Reluctantly, Ada agreed, though her heart was heavy with worry. Promise me you'll be safe, she whispered. Moyo held her close and kissed her forehead. I promise, he said, though a part of him felt uneasy about breaking his vow. The next morning, Moyo packed his rifle and set off into the forest, leaving Ada behind with a heavy heart. Moyo entered the forest with a sense of determination, but something felt off. The forest, which was usually filled with the sounds of life, chirping birds, rustling leaves, and the distant calls of animals, was eerily silent. Moyo brushed off the unsettling feeling, telling himself that the forest would reveal its bounty soon enough. He set his traps and prepared for the hunt, confident that he would return home with food and money, just as he had promised Ada. However, as the day wore on, Moyo found nothing. His traps were empty, and not a single animal crossed his path. It was strange, this forest had always been full of life, and yet today, it seemed barren. Moyo began to feel a sense of unease creeping into his heart, but he pushed the feeling away. Tomorrow will be better, he told himself, settling down for the night in a small clearing. Before I continue, this is a plea to you, my awesome viewers who haven't subscribed to my channel, to please be a part of my growth. I'm begging you click on that subscribe button please, and if you're a returning subscriber, hey, welcome back. I am so happy to have you here, thank you so much. Now let's go back to the story. The next morning, Moyo awoke early and checked his traps, but once again, they were empty. He walked deeper into the forest, searching for any sign of animals, but the forest remained silent. Not a single bird, squirrel, or even a rabbit crossed his path. It was as if the forest was hiding from him. Moyo felt a chill run down his spine. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't quite place what it was. As the day wore on, Moyo's frustration grew. He had never experienced anything like this before. The forest had always been generous to him, but now it seemed as if it had turned its back on him. He wondered if it was a sign, but his pride wouldn't let him give up. He had promised Ada he would return with food, and he wasn't about to break that promise. One more day, he thought. I have one more day. On the third day, Moyo was determined to catch something. He couldn't return home empty-handed, not after everything he had promised Ada. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, Moyo spotted movement in the bushes. His heart raced as he crouched down, rifle in hand. There, in a small clearing, stood a beautiful antelope, its graceful form illuminated by the fading light. But as Moyo took aim, he noticed something that made him hesitate. The antelope was pregnant. His mind raced back to the stories the village elders had told, the warnings that no hunter should ever kill a pregnant animal while his wife was expecting. It was said to bring bad luck, a curse that could affect the unborn child. Moyo felt a voice in his head whisper, "Turn back. Don't do it." Moyo stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The voice in his head urged him to leave the antelope alone, to turn back and return to the village empty-handed. But then another thought crept in: what would the villagers say if he returned with nothing? Moyo was known as the greatest hunter in Umoda. He couldn't let them see him as a failure. His pride began to cloud his judgment, and he convinced himself that the stories were just old tales meant to scare children. I can't go back with nothing, Moyo muttered to himself as he raised his rifle once more. The antelope looked directly at him, its large eyes filled with innocence. For a moment, Moyo felt a pang of guilt, but he pushed the feeling aside. With a steady hand, he pulled the trigger. The rifle shot echoed through the forest, and the antelope collapsed to the ground. Moyo approached it, but as he did, he noticed something strange. For a brief moment, the antelope's form seemed to flicker, and he saw the face of a woman staring back at him. For a moment, Moyo stood frozen in disbelief. He blinked, and the antelope was just an antelope again, its lifeless body lying on the ground. Moyo shook his head, telling himself it was just a trick of the light or his tired mind playing games with him. But the image of the woman's face remained etched in his memory. There had been something deeply unsettling about those eyes. They weren't the eyes of an animal, but something ancient and full of sorrow. Still, Moyo convinced himself that he had done nothing wrong. The stories of curses and bad luck were just tales, after all. He had a family to provide for, and that was all that mattered. Pushing his doubts aside, Moyo lifted the antelope onto his shoulders and began the journey back to the village. With each step, though, the weight of the antelope seemed heavier than it should have been. And with every rustle of the leaves or whisper of the wind, Moyo felt as if unseen eyes were watching him. The journey back to the village was long, and the forest felt different, almost hostile. Moyo could sense a change in the atmosphere, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. The path he had taken many times before now seemed unfamiliar, as though the trees themselves had shifted, making the forest seem like an entirely different place. Despite his growing unease, Moyo pressed on. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back now. As he emerged from the forest, the village came into view, and for the first time in days, Moyo felt a small sense of relief. The familiar sight of his home, the distant sounds of village life, and the knowledge that he was returning to Ada filled him with hope. He would provide for his family, and everything would be all right. But deep down, a lingering sense of dread clung to him, one that he couldn't shake. When Moyo returned to the village, word of his success spread quickly. The villagers greeted him with admiration, praising him for bringing back such a large catch. "Moyo, the great hunter has returned," they cheered. Though the antelope was just one animal, it was enough to feed the village for several days. Moyo sold the antelope to the local food vendor, who promised a good price. He assured himself once more that he had done the right thing by providing for his family. When Moyo arrived home, Ada greeted him with a warm smile. She had been worried during his absence, but seeing him safe and sound brought her great relief. "You've come back just as you promised," she said, hugging him tightly. Moyo gave her the money from the sale of the antelope and reassured her that they would have enough food and supplies for the weeks to come. Ada, unaware of the details of the hunt, was simply happy that Moyo had returned safely. That evening, the village prepared a feast in Moyo's honor. The food seller cooked the antelope, and the entire village gathered in the square to celebrate. Laughter and music filled the air as people danced and told stories by the fire. Moyo sat by Ada's side, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He had done what he needed to do for his family, and for a moment, all seemed well. However, as Moyo ate the meal, a strange feeling crept over him. He remembered the face of the woman in the forest, and the taste of the meat felt different, almost wrong. The others didn't seem to notice, laughing and enjoying the feast. Moyo tried to shake the feeling, telling himself it was just his imagination. But the weight of his decision still hung heavy in the back of his mind. That night, as Moyo slept, the nightmares began. In his dream, he was back in the forest, standing before the pregnant antelope. But this time, when he looked closer, the antelope's form changed before his eyes. It was no longer an animal, it had the face of the woman he had seen earlier, her eyes filled with sadness and accusation. "You should not have done it," the woman whispered, her voice carrying an otherworldly echo. Moyo awoke with a start, his heart racing. His body was drenched in sweat, and the vision of the woman's sorrowful eyes lingered in his mind. He sat up in bed, glancing over at Ada, who was still peacefully sleeping. He didn't want to disturb her, so he lay back down, telling himself it was just a dream. But as the night stretched on, sleep eluded him, and the image of the woman in the forest haunted his thoughts. Over the next few nights, Moyo's dreams grew worse. Each time, the woman appeared, her face filled with sorrow, whispering the same words, "You should not have done it." In some dreams, she walked alongside him through the forest, watching him with those same sorrowful eyes. In others, the trees themselves seemed to come alive, closing in on him, as if the forest was angry with him for his actions. Moyo tried to dismiss the dreams, but they became more vivid with each passing night. During the day, he tried to focus on helping Ada with preparations for the baby, but the visions lingered in his mind, casting a shadow over his every thought. He didn't tell Ada about the dreams, not wanting to worry her, but the weight of his decision began to feel heavier with each passing day. One early morning, just as the sun was rising, Ada began to feel the first signs of labor. The baby was coming. Moyo rushed to gather the village midwives, who quickly arrived to assist Ada. The women helped her into bed, offering her comfort and guidance as she prepared to give birth. Moyo stayed by Ada's side, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement. Despite the nightmares that had plagued him, he felt a sense of hope. Soon, they would meet their child. However, as the hours passed, it became clear that something was wrong. The labor was not progressing as it should, and despite Ada's best efforts, the baby would not come. The midwives exchanged worried glances, whispering among themselves. They had never seen a labor last this long without progress. Moyo's heart raced with fear as he watched Ada grow weaker, her face pale and her breathing labored. As the hours stretched into days, Ada remained in labor, but the baby still would not come. The midwives tried everything they knew, herbs, prayers, and whispered words of comfort, but nothing worked. Ada grew weaker by the hour, her strength fading as she struggled to bring their child into the world. The midwives had never seen anything like this before, and they began to fear that something far more powerful was at play. The villagers gathered outside Moyo's home, whispering among themselves. Some said it was a curse, others believed it was the work of the spirits. Moyo felt the weight of their stares, and the guilt he had been carrying grew heavier. Deep down, he knew that this was no ordinary labor. The stories of the elders echoed in his mind, the warnings about killing a pregnant animal while his wife was expecting. He had broken the sacred law. Now Ada and their unborn child were paying the price. As the third day of Ada's labor dawned, Moyo could no longer stand by and watch her suffer. His guilt was too much to bear. He knew that the curse had fallen upon them because of his actions, and the thought of losing both Ada and their child because of his pride filled him with despair. In his desperation, Moyo decided to seek help from the village's chief priest, a wise man known for his knowledge of the spirit world. Moyo rushed to the chief priest's hut, his heart pounding with fear. The priest listened carefully as Moyo recounted the events of the forest, the pregnant antelope, and the strange visions that had haunted him ever since. When Moyo mentioned the antelope's pregnancy, the priest's expression darkened. He stood silently for a moment before speaking. "You have broken the sacred law," the priest said gravely. "And now, the spirits demand a price." The chief priest's words sent a chill down Moyo's spine. The priest explained that the antelope Moyo had killed was not an ordinary animal, it had been a guardian of the forest, one of the ancient spirits that protected the balance between the natural world and the human realm. By killing the pregnant antelope, Moyo had disrupted that balance, and now the spirits were angry. The priest told Moyo that there was only one way to save Ada and their child. Moyo would have to journey deep into the forest, to the heart of the spirit's domain. There, he would need to plead with the spirits for forgiveness and offer them a sacrifice to restore the balance. The path ahead would be dangerous, but Moyo had no choice. He would do whatever it took to save his family. Moyo stood before the chief priest, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. The path that lay ahead of him was filled with uncertainty, but he knew he had no choice. Ada's life and the life of their unborn child depended on him. The priest handed Moyo a small pouch filled with sacred herbs and a bundle of leaves. "These will protect you from the spirit's anger," the priest said. "But remember, you must approach them with humility. Only then will they consider your plea." With the pouch in hand and the weight of his guilt pressing down on him, Moyo set out for the forest. The villagers watched in silence as he disappeared into the trees, their faces filled with concern. Moyo had always been a brave hunter, but this journey was unlike any he had undertaken before. This time, he wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for the lives of those he loved most. Moyo ventured deeper into the forest than he had ever gone before. The air grew colder, and the familiar sounds of birds and animals were replaced by an eerie silence. The trees seemed taller and more twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. With every step, Moyo felt as though the forest was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. The patch of herbs provided some comfort, but it did little to calm the unease that gnawed at his heart. As he walked, Moyo whispered a prayer to the spirits, asking for their forgiveness. He knew he had committed a grave mistake, and now he had to make amends. His mind replayed the moment he killed the pregnant antelope, and once again, he saw the face of the woman in the forest. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, but he pushed forward, determined to save his wife and child. The deeper Moyo ventured into the forest, the more he felt the presence of the spirits. Shadows danced between the trees, and the air seemed thick with a strange, otherworldly energy. Every now and then, Moyo would catch a glimpse of something moving out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. The forest was alive, and it was watching him. Moyo's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to turn back. He knew the spirits were testing him, watching to see if he would falter. The patch of herbs hung from his belt, its presence a reminder that he was not entirely without protection. But even the sacred herbs could only do so much. Moyo knew that if he was to survive this journey, he would need more than just protection, he would need the spirit's forgiveness. After what felt like hours of walking, Moyo arrived at a small clearing deep within the forest. The air was still, and a strange light seemed to emanate from the trees. In the center of the clearing stood the spirit of the antelope, the same creature Moyo had killed. But now, it was no longer an antelope. Its form flickered between human and animal, its eyes filled with the same sorrow Moyo had seen in his dreams. The spirit did not speak at first. It simply stood there, watching Moyo with those sad, ancient eyes. Moyo fell to his knees, his heart heavy with guilt. "I am sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't know. I was desperate to provide for my family, and in my pride, I ignored the warnings. Please, forgive me." Moyo's voice cracked with emotion as he begged the spirit for forgiveness. He explained how Ada's labor had stalled, how the midwives had tried everything but to no avail. "Please," Moyo pleaded, "spare my wife and child. I will never hunt again. I will never take another life from the forest." The weight of his guilt was overwhelming, and tears filled his eyes as he knelt before the spirit. The antelope spirit remained silent for a long moment, its eyes never leaving Moyo. Finally, it spoke, its voice like the whisper of the wind through the trees. "You have broken the sacred law," the spirit said, its voice tinged with sorrow. "You took a life that was not yours to take, and now the balance of the forest has been disturbed. A price must be paid to restore what has been lost." Moyo's heart sank as he listened to the spirit's words. He had known that there would be a price to pay for his actions, but hearing it from the spirit itself made the weight of his mistake even heavier. The spirit explained that the balance between the human world and the spirit world had been broken when Moyo killed the pregnant antelope. To restore that balance, a life would need to be given in return. Moyo's voice cracked with emotion as he begged the spirit for forgiveness. He explained how Ada's labor had stalled, how the midwives had tried everything but to no avail. "Please," Moyo pleaded, "spare my wife and child. I will never hunt again. I will never take another life from the forest." The weight of his guilt was overwhelming, and tears filled his eyes as he knelt before the spirit. The antelope spirit remained silent for a long moment, its eyes never leaving Moyo. Finally, it spoke, its voice like the whisper of the wind through the trees. "You have broken the sacred law," the spirit said, its voice tinged with sorrow. "You took a life that was not yours to take, and now the balance of the forest has been disturbed. A price must be paid to restore what has been lost." Moyo's heart sank as he listened to the spirit's words. He had known that there would be a price to pay for his actions, but hearing it from the spirit itself made the weight of his mistake even heavier. The spirit explained that the balance between the human world and the spirit world had been broken when Moyo killed the pregnant antelope. To restore that balance, a life would need to be given in return. Moyo's mind raced with fear. Would the spirits take Ada? Or would they demand the life of their unborn child? The thought of losing either of them was too much to bear. But before he could speak, the spirit continued, "There is another way. You may offer your own life as payment. If you are willing to make that sacrifice, we will consider sparing your wife and child." Moyo's heart pounded in his chest. The spirits were offering him a choice, he could sacrifice himself to save Ada and their child, or he could walk away and leave their fate in the hands of the spirits. For Moyo, the choice was clear. He had brought this curse upon his family, and he would do anything to save them, even if it meant giving up his own life. With a deep breath, Moyo stood tall before the spirit. "I will offer my life in exchange for theirs," he said, his voice steadied despite the fear that gnawed at him. "Take me, and let them live." The spirit regarded him for a long moment before nodding. "Your selflessness has been noted," the spirit said. "But the decision is not ours alone. The forest will judge whether your sacrifice is enough." The spirits gathered around Moyo, their forms shifting between animal and human as they whispered among themselves. The air grew thick with tension, and Moyo could feel their eyes upon him, weighing his every word and action. He stood tall, his heart filled with fear but also with resolve. He had made his decision, and he would face whatever consequences came. Finally, the antelope spirit stepped forward. "The forest has heard your plea," it said, its voice heavy with the weight of centuries. "But before we can accept your sacrifice, you must pass a trial. You will journey deeper into the forest, to the heart of the spirit's domain. There, you will face the true guardians of the forest. Only if you prove your worth will your sacrifice be accepted." Moyo's heart raced as the antelope spirit explained the trial that lay ahead. He had already ventured deep into the forest, but now he would be entering the very heart of the spirit's domain, a place few mortals had ever seen. The thought of what awaited him filled him with fear, but he knew that he had no choice. His family's lives depended on him. With the spirits watching, Moyo took a deep breath and began his journey deeper into the forest. The trees grew taller and denser, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the sunlight. The air grew colder, and strange whispers filled the air, as though the forest itself was alive with ancient secrets. Moyo pressed on, determined to face whatever trial the spirits had in store for him. After what felt like hours of walking, Moyo arrived at a large clearing surrounded by towering trees. In the center of the clearing stood a group of figures, their forms shifting between human and animal. These were the true guardians of the forest, ancient spirits who had protected the land for centuries. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and their presence was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The lead guardian, a massive figure with the head of a lion and the body of a man, stepped forward. "You have come to seek forgiveness," it said, its voice a deep rumble that echoed through the trees. "But forgiveness is not given lightly. You must prove your worth and show that you understand the consequences of your actions. Only then will we decide if your sacrifice is enough." The lion-headed guardian raised its hand, and the earth beneath Moyo's feet began to tremble. "Your first trial will be one of endurance," the guardian said. "You will face the elements of the forest. If you can withstand them, you will prove your strength and resolve." With that, the guardian stepped back, and the forest itself seemed to come alive. A powerful wind began to blow through the clearing, whipping at Moyo's clothes and pushing him back. The temperature dropped, and soon, rain began to fall, soaking Moyo to the bone. The wind howled, and the rain turned to ice, pelting him from all sides. But Moyo stood firm, his heart filled with determination. He would not give up, no matter how harsh the trial became. The storm raged on, growing fiercer with each passing moment. The wind howled like a wild beast, and the rain felt like needles against Moyo's skin. His body ached from the cold, and his muscles screamed in protest, but he refused to give in. He thought of Ada, lying weak and in pain, and of their unborn child, whose life depended on his success. That thought alone gave him the strength to keep standing. Hours passed, and still, the storm raged. Moyo's body trembled with exhaustion, but he planted his feet firmly in the ground, refusing to be moved. He had faced down lions and leopards in the past, but this trial was different. This was a test of his willpower, of his ability to endure in the face of overwhelming adversity. And though his body was weak, his spirit remained strong. Just when Moyo thought he could endure no more, the storm began to come. The wind died down, and the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle. Moyo stood drenched and shivering, but he had survived the first trial. The lion-headed guardian stepped forward once again, nodding in approval. "You have proven your strength," it said. "But strength alone is not enough. There is more you must prove." Moyo nodded, though his body ached from the ordeal. He knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The guardian motioned for him to follow, and Moyo did so, his heart pounding with anticipation. The second trial awaited him, and he could only hope that he was prepared for whatever challenge lay ahead. The lion-headed guardian led Moyo deeper into the forest, to a place where the trees grew taller and the air grew thick with mist. There, in the center of the mist, Moyo saw a figure lying on the ground, injured and weak. As he approached, he realized that it was a young deer, its leg caught in a hunter's trap. The deer looked up at Moyo with wide, frightened eyes, its body trembling in pain. "This is your second trial," the guardian said. "You must show compassion, even to those who are weak and defenseless. You have taken life before without understanding the consequences. Now, you must save a life, and in doing so, prove that you are worthy of forgiveness." Moyo knelt beside the deer, his heart filled with empathy. He knew that the forest spirits were watching his every move. Moyo carefully examined the trap, his hands trembling as he walked to free the deer's leg. The animal's eyes were filled with fear, but Moyo spoke to it in soothing tones, doing his best to calm it. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I've taken lives without thinking, but I will not let that happen again." Slowly, Moyo managed to loosen the trap, and with great care, he freed the deer from its painful hold. The deer staggered to its feet, its legs still weak from the injury. Moyo watched as the deer limped away, disappearing into the mist. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, knowing that he had done something good, something to atone for the harm he had caused. The lion-headed guardian stepped forward, its eyes filled with approval. "You have shown compassion," it said. "But there is still one final trial." Moyo's heart pounded in his chest as the lion-headed guardian led him to a large, ancient tree at the heart of the forest. The tree was massive, its branches reaching high into the sky, and its roots twisting deep into the earth. In front of the tree stood the antelope spirit, its form flickering between human and animal. The air around the tree felt heavy with magic, and Moyo could feel the weight of the spirit's judgment pressing down on him. "The final trial," the antelope spirit said, "is a test of humility. You must admit your wrongs, not just to us, but to yourself. Only by facing your own flaws and mistakes can you hope to seek true forgiveness." Moyo nodded, his heart heavy with guilt. He had already admitted his mistakes to the spirits, but now he realized that he had been avoiding the hardest part, admitting them to himself. Moyo knelt before the ancient tree, his heart filled with regret. He thought of the life he had taken in the forest, the pregnant antelope whose death had brought this curse upon his family. He thought of Ada, suffering in labor because of his actions, and of the unborn child who might never see the light of day. The weight of his mistakes pressed down on him, and for the first time, Moyo allowed himself to truly feel the pain and guilt that had been building inside him. "I was wrong," Moyo said, his voice barely a whisper. "I let my pride and desperation cloud my judgment. I took a life that was not mine to take, and now my family is paying the price. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I will do whatever it takes to make things right." As he spoke,